host of Prescribed Truth, where we seek to distribute the truth that the doctor prescribes to the church and the world today. Let's see if you're going to let this person go by me real quick. All right. So, guys, I'm on the way to pick up my boys, and there was a comment that was made on my previous video that I released, and we got into the conversation about, you know, people getting into the modern translations and when that took place, or when most people get into reading modern translations, especially if they started off with the KJV. And so, with that being said, we started having conversations. He was starting to ask me more personal things about as far as my own upbringing and whatnot, which I don't mind. So in the midst of that, it seems like, you know, as we were going back and forth, he asked he would like to hear or see a video of a testimonial, so to speak. Now, guys, I've talked about my past as far as, you know, churches and, you know, what brought me to doing Prescribed Truth and everything else. But I think it's fair, the fact that I don't think I probably have mentioned it in passing in the video, but never really talked about why I personally read modern translations versus the KJV, if you will. Because technically, the KJV is a modern translation in of itself compared to the English translations that were out at the time. I know a lot of people think that the KJV was like the first English translation. Go bump, bump, bump. Gotta go over these bumps. But it wasn't. The KJV was not the first English translation. You had the Bishop's Bible, you had the Great Bible, and what the KJV did. Oh, you had in the Tyndale Bible. The Tyndale version. He recorded the New Testament, translated the New Testament, and which was very unpopular at that time, and actually risked his life. Man, Hanks risked his life. He was killed behind what he did, as far as making the translation of the Bible. Basically made it more available for the common folk, if you will, and so he was killed behind that. And so, yes. So the KJV was like that. It was made to be more accessible to the common folk. Whereas beforehand, people didn't have Bibles in their homes. They would go to the church, and that's where they would get their reading of Scripture. And so now, that was a little tangent. Now, as far as myself goes, guys, when I was growing up, I went to a Baptist church with my mom's. They only used the KJV. My mom got me on a New King James because I was younger. She was a rebel. So she got me on a New King James version, and that's what I had. I had the KJV and I had the New King James version throughout my youth. But I was an unbeliever. Guys, I didn't start believing in the true Jesus until 2013. I was 22 years old then. Yeah, 22. So from the time that I was a youngin' to about 17, I was using the New King James. But I stopped going to church when I was 17, 18 years old. When I started going back to church and got into the whole cult, and you can hear about that if you're watching my first few videos while I started Prescribed Truth, I'd go in more detail with that. But when I started going back to church and ended up in the cult, I was using the New King James version. Alright, so that's what I had then. And I was still an unbeliever. Thought I was a Christian, but I really wasn't. Didn't believe in the gospel, didn't believe in the Godhead or any of those things. I just, you know, I believed in what the pastor was teaching us. Anyway, so later on, when I began to be discipled and brought around people who were teaching the truth and actually heard the gospel for the first time, that individual was reading from an ESV. So he was reading from an ESV and going over John chapter 1. And so I tried to follow along the best I could because, you know, with the New King James, which I was reading from at the time, followed along just fine. And so I was able to get the gist of where he was going. The ESV, you know, is a word-to-word translation. It was more modernized, where it is, you know, it's better fitting to how we talk now. But it's a word for word. And anyway, so not trying to say the New King James and the King James aren't word for word. They are word for word. They just, you know, translated to more of our common language. And the reason I bring that up because the KJV, once again, remember guys, the KJV was created or was made in order to appeal to the more common people because they talk more of their language. And so it's just keeping on the same tradition. The ESV does the same thing. It's word for word. makes it where we can understand it more like what we would say. And so anyway, so I was reading from the ESV, heard the gospel message, and after hearing the gospel message, I wanted to read. My Bible was getting old at the time, so it wasn't like I said it wasn't like I had a new King James and then was like, hey, I don't want this no more, give me that ESV over there. Like, no, my Bible was tearing up. I had it for a long time. It was breaking apart on me. And matter of fact, I still have my King James. I still have it, but it was breaking. It's still on my bookshelf. It just was breaking apart. And so I needed something. I needed another Bible. And so they offered me an ESV, and that's how I got the ESV Bible. And then I had it for a long time, and until it started to wear out. And when it wore out, then my next one I got was an NASB. But the thing is, guys, when I heard the gospel message, the guy asked me in the comments, he said, how did you come across the modern version versus the English version, or the modern version versus the KJV? And I told him, I was like, mine's, just happened. It was just, it wasn't like I was told that KJV was bad and everything else. It just happened. And when I got that ESV, I just continued to read it, and I didn't see any differences that were enough for me to be concerned with reading it, where I couldn't get the truth of the gospel of who Jesus is. But then I started learning about textual criticism. This is what I mentioned in my previous video, guys. As I started getting into apologetics, because as the Lord saved me, I don't want people to go back. I don't want people to believe the falsehoods that I grew up in, or that I was coming up in. And so I got into apologetics. And as I got into apologetics, I was dealing with people different cults, who was talking about, you live in a white man's religion, and that, the white man wrote the Bible. And that's what started it. Somebody was like, man, the white man wrote that. And so I started looking at how the Bible came to be the Bible. And as I began to do research and study, I learned about textual criticism. And I learned about what people may claim the more modern translations, or the scriptures that more modern translations omit, and everything else, and what the KJV has. And so as I looked at it and started looking at the information that was given, and started looking at the archaeological digs that were done, and what was found, and what people are bringing people to, why those things were omitted, and yet there are notes. I love about our faith, we have nothing to hide. There are notes in those translations that let you know that this verse was omitted or not in earlier manuscripts. And so with that information, guys, I was like, oh, that's cool. We're upfront about this guy, And so that's what got me into textual criticism, and coming to the understanding that it's not that the modern translations today take out verses. It's possible that the later manuscripts that were used in order to come up with the KJV, which is like the Textus Receptus and the Latin, what is it? The Latin Vulgate. Yeah, Textus Receptus and the Latin Vulgate. So the manuscripts that was used to compose those, copies may have been later manuscripts than what we found from earlier, that was dated earlier. And so it's just logical. But yeah, so give a look that background. So that was a little testimony to how I came to get into more modern translations. That's what was asked of me, and I hope this helps. And I'm sorry I didn't remember the guy's name who was leaving the comments. I do apologize if you watch this, because I'm just doing this on the fly. But thank you for the question, and I hope this helps. And I know I haven't done a video like this in a while, especially driving. But anyway, guys, I hope this will help for you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like this video, share it. What are your thoughts? When did you come across reading the more modern translations, if you grew up on the KJV? And have you looked into the textual criticism and understanding how the Bible actually came to be? What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, this world is full of errors, but the only thing that the doctor prescribes is truth. Blessings.